I saw last week's year. We did.
What's that?
We did not start the text as of yet.
No, that'll be tonight. That'll be tonight. We're going to do. I'll wait for another minute or so. I'll give you what the plan is for tonight. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, I guess we shall start. Okay, here's the plan for tonight. First of all, before the plan, tonight's learning is for Refuah Shlema for Rafael Yoshua Michael Ben Sarah and Meirav Bat Vivian. Some of you know Chana Abrams, who works at the Makolet. Her husband, unfortunately, is very sick with COVID in the hospital, quite a bit of time now. That's the first name. They just added a name to him for Rafael. So we will daven for a refuah shlema for him.
Really? Mike?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Mike.
Oh, Mike.
Big Mike.
Hi. I know Mike very well. From football.
Right. Yeah, he's very sick.
How long has he been in the hospital?
A couple of weeks already. I talked to him about at least over a month ago. They were just getting COVID in the family. And I said, okay, we'll talk because I teach a son. I'll get back to you. And didn't hear anything. One thing led to another, and found out, of course, I talked to Chana today. They're trying some natural thing. Right now his lungs are shot. So we'll see what happens.
What's his name? What's his name in Hebrew again? Sorry.
Rafael Yehoshua Michael Ben Sarah.
Michael Ben
Sarah. Mm-hmm. Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the deal.
Okay.
Okay, that's first of all. Second of all, a couple of you had asked me about coming to the house. For the foreseeable future, it's still going to stay on Zoom for two reasons. One, Bezrat Hashem, we're making a wedding next month. It's 6 weeks from tonight. And I can't take any chances. And we'll see what happens after that. The others, we'll see how things progress. Bezrat Hashem. I have gotten so used to this method, even though I really enjoy the in-person. I think a lot of people also find this comfortable, which is okay with me. So we'll see how things play out. But right now we're going to just go with it for this way. Plan for tonight. We're going to read. I'm not reading the entire first parak. I'm going to read the first 12 psukim. We'll see why. Read it and translate. I'm not going to spend. I'm not going to ask any questions. Just I want you to listen to the words, even though you may have read it. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about the structure, and then we're going to start getting into the text itself. Okay. And I've said many times, this is not an original approach to learning, but I've said many times that one of the best ways to learn something, whether it's Parshat Shavua, a Rashi, a Gemara, whatever, Mishnah, is sit down as if it's the first time you're learning it. This way you kind of open your mind up to say like, oh, I never caught that, never noticed that before. Okay, I'm going to read. I'm going to kind of read it quickly only because I don't want to spend a lot of time reading tonight. But the main point is I want to get to at least Pasuk Yud Bet to show you something that happens within the chapter. The city sits in solitude. The city was great with people, has become like a widow. Rabati vagoyim, it was big, great among the nations. Sarati ba'medinot, it was a prince among the provinces, and it has become Haita Lamas. It's only become a country that pays tributary, meaning taxes, to another country. That it cries, she cries. We're ostensibly, of course, talking about the city of Jerusalem, cries bitterly at night, and her tears are on her cheeks. She has no comfort from her lovers. All of her friends have betrayed her. They become her enemies. Who has become the enemies? We'll see. Yehuda has gone into exile because of the suffering. She sits among the non-Jewish nations. She finds no rest. She has, all these people are pursuing her and overtaking her in the narrow straits. This, by the way, is where we get the expression, the time period from the 17th of Tammuz until Tisha B'Av is known as Bein HaMitzarim, from the word tsar also, which means pain or trouble. Mitzar for the word straits or narrow straits. Darchei Tzion Avelot, the streets of Zion, of Yerushalayim, are even mourning. There's no one coming for the Chagim. Kol she'areha shomemim, all the gates are empty. Kohaneha nehanachim, all of her kohanim are sighing. Bituloteha nugot v'hi marla, all the maidens are saddened, and she herself, meaning the city, is embittered. Ayutzarea lerosh oiveha shalu, all her adversaries have become her master, meaning those who were her enemies are now ruling her. Ki Hashem hoga arov pisha'eha, for Hashem has aggrieved her for her tremendous amounts of sin. And her young children have gone into captivity in front of the enemy. You'll notice also, and we're going to come to this, I hope, still tonight, in Pasuk Hey, this is the first mention of Hashem. Vav, Vayetzemi bat Zion kol hadara. All of the splendor, all the glory of Yerushalayim is gone. Hayu sareh ke'ayalim lo matza mireh. Her leaders were like deer that found no pasture. And they went as if they were with no strength from the people who were chasing them. Yerushalayim remembers the days of affliction and sorrow. All those were treasures that were from days gone by. As her people fell into the hands of the enemy, there's no one to help her. So the enemies not only saw her, but also gloated over her as well. There are certain metaphors and similes, and I'll explain the difference, that are used here that we're going to talk about tonight. In English, a metaphor, in Hebrew we call it a metaphora and a dimui. In English, a metaphor and a simile. A simile is using the word like or as. For example, he's as fast as a deer. Okay, that's a simile. You're comparing something similar. A metaphor, metaphora, is when you use for example, on the wings of angels. It's an image you're trying to evoke. It doesn't say like you're like a wing of the angel, but it means, okay, so we're coming across metaphors and similes galore in Eicha, and we're going to talk about some of them tonight. Bezrat Hashem. Chet chata'a Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim has sinned a lot. Al kein lenida hayata. Therefore, she has become like a wanderer. You'll notice if you have English translation that the word nida does not mean, as we translate sometimes, as a woman who is a nida, but rather we'll talk about it. Someone who is, let's just say, a wanderer. All those who used to respect her now have scorned her because they have seen her disgrace. Even she herself, the city of Yerushalayim itself, sighs and turns away. Tumata b'shuleha, her impurities on the hem of her garment. Lo zachra charita, she didn't pay attention to the consequences. Batered pilaim, ein menachem la, there's no one to comfort her. Rei Hashem et onyiki gdil oyev. Yado paras tsar, kol machamadea kirata goyim ba'u mikdasha, shetzivitiya lo yavo bakahal lach. Up until this point, and I'm going to read part of Yud Aleph, the speaker, so to speak, is a narrator. Okay, we remember, we came to the conclusion that for the most part it appears almost certainly that Yirmiyahu wrote Megillat Eicha, and as the narrator, who could be Hashem, who could be whatever, we'll talk about that, is talking about Yerushalayim and the horrible things and the pain and the suffering. Take a look at Yud Aleph. Now this is where there's a transition within the pasuk. First half of the pasuk, Yud Aleph, number 11. Sorry. Kol amah ne'enachim. All of the people were sighing. Mivakshim lechem. They're seeking out bread. Natnu machamadehem ba'ochel hashiv nafesh. They traded treasures for food to keep alive. Here comes a switch. Re'ei Hashem v'habita. Look, Hashem, and pay attention. Ki hayiti zolela. For I have become a glutton. Now, what happens in Pasuk Yud Aleph? It's important before we start looking at the individual text. Until this point, again, we're talking from the perspective of using literary term. There's a narrator, and we're assuming for it now, we're going to make the assumption it's God. Hashem himself prophet, through Navi Yirmiyahu, is describing the suffering city of Yerushalayim. And it does not take a rocket scientist, by the way, there is really no such thing, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand and to hear the pain and suffering of you heard this word ne'enacha, or anacha, the concept of the sigh and this mournful dirge almost that you're hearing, that is being brought through these psukim. But then it switches right here in the middle of Pasuk Yud Aleph, that I'm not going to read the rest of the parak, you just take my word for it right now, that for the most part, but not completely, the rest of the parak is now Yerushalayim herself speaking and talking. And the perspective of Yerushalayim is a little bit different. So what we're going to start with, before we look at the actual words and go to some of the text, just to discuss this for a moment, is why was it necessary, in your opinion, if you have an idea, if you want to take a guess here, and there's no right or wrong, it's your opinion, why would you think that Yirmiyahu employs this method of two different speakers? In other words, you have the narrator starting the first 10 and a half psukim, and then talking about Yerushalayim, descriptors, and the pain and suffering. And then you have Yerushalayim herself speaking in the second half of the chapter. And I know I didn't read the second half of the chapter, but just again, take my word for it, it's Yerushalayim's perspective. Why would you think that Yirmiyahu would do something like that? If you have a thought. And if not, I'll give you.
A master teacher.
Meaning?
Can you hear me?
Yes, meaning?
When you have a really good teacher, they don't use the same approach. They try this and they change their way of teaching, and they change their way of teaching to different ways to gain the people. And a good writer, okay, you're as a writer, a teacher, a prophet, show it from various aspects. Okay.
Right. That's an excellent approach. I like that a lot. It's very good.
Not mean that there's author 1, 2, 3, and they glued together. It's a bunch of baloney.
No. Of course not. Of course not.
Yeah.
I like very much what you're saying. It's excellent. I'll give you another perspective. Anybody else have another possible answer? Sorry?
I have a completely different perspective.
I'm all ears.
When you said that this was Yerushalayim herself speaking from the middle of Pasuk Yud Aleph onwards, that was quite a surprise to me, because I'd always thought, and this is my idea of the first 10 and a half psukim, where you've got a narrator, and we assume this is Yirmiyahu describing what has happened to Yerushalayim. It's a narrator, but you have to remember that in Yerushalayim, that Yirmiyahu is a Navi to Am Yisrael.
Right.
And he's describing all these tzarot to Am Yisrael and Yerushalayim, and he starts identifying with it, and therefore I would say the first person from the middle of Pasuk Yud Aleph onwards is Yirmiyahu himself, identifying with the tzarot of Yerushalayim.
Very good. So there is no 100% answer to who's the first half, who's the second half. Some will say the first half is Hashem, the second half is the people of Yerushalayim. Some will say the first half is Yirmiyahu's perspective, the second half is so there are multiples. I hear what you're saying. It's very good. I'm going to give you one potential answer here also. It's very easy. Let me back up a second. Companies often hire consultants when they're having trouble. I worked for a company many years ago that brought in these very high-powered, extremely expensive consultants to interview management, upper management, lower management, middle management, some of the line workers, and make their recommendations on how to overhaul the business and make it more profitable. We could have done it ourselves. We could have. So why didn't my boss spend, I'm trying to remember, at least $120,000 for this 3-day exercise? Because from a person's perspective who comes in from the outside, they will sometimes not only see what you don't necessarily see from the inside, but in addition to that, they can be brutally honest. They can tell you all the warts. They can tell you what the problems are, because they don't have necessarily what to lose, because they leave after this. Now, obviously, it's not the same thing here. But on the one hand, you have the outside perspective of quote unquote Hashem saying from the outside, look at this Look at the city. He's not talking, by the way, we're not hearing this in first person. This isn't my city. This isn't my, etc. But it's the perspective from outside of what's happened. And it's brutally honest. Who you thought you were your friends, they're gone. The people who used to put you up on a pedestal and look at you, forget about them. You used to be this major powerhouse, forget it. You're out of the game. Along comes Yerushalayim and says, oy vey, look what's happened to us. Look what's happened to me. There's a little bit of taking responsibility. In other words, if you look at the first half, it's like, look what you did, look what you did, look what you did, look what happened to the city. The second half, until you get to the very last pasuk, and we're going to come to that later, maybe tonight, is starting to, yes, but look at my pain, look at my suffering and everything, without necessarily taking a lot of responsibility right away. So it's this different, the responsibility for the calamity of Yerushalayim isn't necessarily there yet, but it's there for eventually Yerushalayim, so to speak, to confess her sins, what she did wrong. Now, I do want to mention a word that you need to know, because I'll probably use it plenty. I'm going to use it more in English probably, but you should know both of them, Hebrew and English. For those of you who ever studied literature or anything, you'll know that there's a word called personification. In Hebrew, it's called ha'anasha. Personification is attributing human qualities to the inanimate. So if I say that the rock flew out the window, a rock doesn't fly, right? But the city speaks. The city, the ashes spoke, which doesn't say that here, but ashes don't speak. So there's personification. There's also a term which I've used many times over the years, anthropomorphism, or anthropomorphic is when you attribute human qualities to Hashem. You say God's arm, God's outstretched arm, that's anthropomorphic. But personification runs through a tremendous amount of the Megillat Eicha. So just kind of to summarize where we're holding before we start looking now, going back to Pasuk Aleph, and that is that the first part of the Perek, we're going to just go with the approach right now. And even though, again, there are other approaches, that it's Hashem's point of view. The second half is the personification or personified city of Yerushalayim, giving the reader, you and me, a kind of a glimpse into the mindset of Yerushalayim. So what I'm going to do is let's take a look at the first pasuk. I'm going to read it and translate it, go back to it, and I'm not going to be reading and translating and going through into depth in every single pasuk in the Megillah. We're going to do certain ones, especially in the first parak. Okay, so let's take a look at the very, very beginning of the parak, and let's take a look at this. And by the way, some of you may have paid attention this week, Shabbat, yesterday when the Parshat Shavua was being read, and you will have remembered that we talked about at the first introductory class that the first appearance of the word Aleph Yud Kaf Hey was in yesterday's Parasha, Eicha. Right, so that was, Hashem starts to enter into conversation with Adam Arishon in Gan Eden and says, Eicha, where are you? Okay. How? Yes.
Hashem actually said something to Adam Rishon Lifnechem.
Yes.
He said, don't eat from Etz Hadat.
No, I'm not saying he didn't speak them before. I'm saying that but I was adding in Rashi's comment of why in the world would Hashem say, where are you? Yeah, because he's trying to enter into, not just to shock him, to enter a conversation.
Because obviously Hashem knows very well where he is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Tov. How has the city sat alone? Ha'ir Rabatiyam, the city that was once so full of people, Hayita ka'almana, has become like a widow. Rabati v'goyim, it was great among the nations. Sarati b'medinot, it was princess of countries. Hayta lamas, has become, like I told you, has become a tributary. By the way, well, forget that, by the way, never mind. So here's another question I want to ask you. And I may have asked this already once, but I would like to bring it up again because we're at the very beginning. Let's assume for a moment God tasked you in the year 70. No, not the year 70. Let's go back in 586 BCE. The Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. Hashem turns to you and says, okay, you're my prophet, and I want you to write a Megillah. I want you to write this book that is going to be read for the next few centuries about what happened now. Where would you start? What would be the beginning of your story, you think?
it wouldn't be my initiative. It would be Hashem's initiative. You want me to write this? I'm going to
You're
write the
writing it
Hashem.
through with nevuah. Doesn't mean necessarily Hashem's telling you what to write, but you're writing it with nevuah. Okay, so where would you start the narrative? Would you start with Nebuchadnezzar coming to Yerushalayim? Sorry?
And since I can never be in the place of a Navi, I have no idea.
Okay, but I'm not telling you about judging. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you were tasked with writing Megillat Eicha. Hashem says, I want you to write, it's not called Megillat Eicha, it's called, I want you to write a Megillah about the destruction of Yerushalayim. Where would you start?
Without being a Navi, because if it's...
Without being a Navi. Say without being a Navi. Where would you start?
Even at school, I had terrible problems writing essays.
Okay, so then we'll skip you.
Skip me.
Put you here. Wait, I'm putting you on mute. There. See, now you can't even talk. There. Shh. Where?
I think hello? I'm not on mute.
No, you're not. I hear you.
I agree with Michael, what he says, that it'd be presumptuous of us to think that we are Nevi'im, because Nevi is not writing it on his own. He is doing what Hashem wants.
Okay.
So
fair
it's
enough.
Presumptuous of that initiative.
So let me change
But
yeah.
On another story, I would start at the end and then go back at how you got to the end.
Okay. Good. I've asked this question over the years when I've given talks on Tisha B'Av, and most people seem to say they would start the narrative with the entry of Nebuchadnezzar to Yerushalayim and the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, so that we know the background to what's happening here. But it's not what happens. What Yirmiyahu does, he starts Eicha not with the destruction, but with this, and not with the roar of an enemy. In other words, instead of starting with this massive amount of noise and destruction and burning and these, and for those of you who've been to the southern wall excavations, the pushing of these stones off, that wasn't the time of Yirmiyahu, but these stones off the wall, you start off with a whisper almost. Desolation, silence, crying. It's almost like an eerie silence. I detest making comparisons between a book of Tanakh and literature or a movie, but I'm going to do it anyways. You come to a movie, you sit down to see a movie, and the opening scene, the very first thing, before the credits, the absolute first thing you see is a soldier looking over a battlefield, and you hear absolutely nothing except some birds flying above. There's no dialogue, and the soldier, the general, whoever he is just looking at the devastation. You see smoke, you see all these things. That's a very powerful beginning versus opening credits, and then you see cannons and fighting, and then you see the silence. Silence is a tremendously powerful tool. And I'll tell you from a different perspective, though. And again, I don't know what was in the mind of the Navi as he wrote this, and nor the communication between Hashem and the Navi. That we, as you say, very presumptuous of me as well. But I will tell you that I think that it harkens back to something what we learned a long time ago when we were talking about Eliyahu Navi. If you remember, Eliyahu Navi is brought to a mountaintop, and Hashem says, that he brings wind and fire and thunder and lightning. And Hashem says, that's not where I'm found. Is that he says, Kol demamadaka, in the absolute perfect quiet silence. That's where Hashem is found. What does that mean? God's everywhere. God's literally every single place. So what does that mean? Kol demamadaka, that the interaction, the time when you quiet your mind and allow Hashem this connection with you, that's when you're able to open your mind. The book of Eicha, the Megillah Eicha, opens up in a sense with silence. It opens up with silence, like, how in the world could this have happened to this amazing city? And he uses a couple of terms over and over. Now, I will tell you, I told you this already, I think in the first class. I'm going to tell you this, and we're going to come up with this term many, many times again. And the term is in Hebrew is called milah mancha, or a word or a phrase, in this case, we're going to probably just talk about words, that repeats multiple times. We're going to talk about a couple of them tonight. Milah mancha is not just, now, because you can't like underline something in the Torah or in Navi, in the Klaf. So by using a milah mancha, if there is a form of underlining or bolding something. And couple words are used multiple times in this chapter, and they are almana, which means a widow, and badad. And both of them appear in the first pasuk. Badad is being a feeling of aloneness, being lonely. And it has another connotation that we know that, for example, a person who was a mitzorah, a leper, had to be badad, had to be alone, was secluded, segregated from the rest of the community. And almanah is a widow. And we're going to see how that fits in with our personification of the city of Yerushalayim in a few minutes. But at the same time that we see the opening words, Eicha yashva vadad, that how is it possible this city sits alone? At the same time, it is also a source of comfort. Now, may that be the right word. Let me explain to you what I mean. It's going to come coming into it from a backwards way. Moshe Rabbeinu was on Har Sinai, getting the first luchot. And Hashem, and we know that at the bottom of the mountain, because the people, for various reasons, miscalculated, thanks to the Erev and the visions they saw, think that Moshe is not going to come down. And they turn to Aaron, they build the golden calf. Elo Elohecha Yisrael, this is your God, O Israel. It was, and we talk about that. It's also in Kuzari that it wasn't Avodah Zarah, it's Avodah Shehi Sarah. And Hashem and Moshe says, I hear like there's this tremendous noise down there. Yehoshua tells him this. Because Hashem tells them, go down, go down because your people have messed up. And he says that they refers to them as an Am Kishei Oref. They're stiff-necked, stubborn people. Go down. Moshe Rabbeinu does what he does, and he goes back up to the top of the mountain, and he talks to Hashem. He says, Hashem, have mercy on them. Ki am kishei oref, because they're a stubborn people. When Hashem says the same exact words, it's a complaint that the fact that we are stubborn people, and look what we've done. In spite of all the good that Hashem's done, look what has happened. Look what Am Yisrael has done. Now Moshe Rabbeinu turns that same phrase on to the reason why Hashem should have mercy on Am Yisrael. Because we're a stubborn people, Hashem, please, we keep doing the same and messing up, please have mercy on us. In a sense, it is possible, according to some Mefarshim, that this is what's happening in the very, very first pasuk. How? On the one hand, where the plaint, P-L-A-I-N-T, the plaint, like the moan, the groaning of the narrator, is how in the world can this happen that this magnificent city is badad? On the other hand, we also have to remember the words of Bilam Harasha, who said, "Hen an levadad yishkon." On the one hand, we think, oh, that's a terrible thing that we're all sitting alone. But no, how do we maintain our our Jewishness? How do we maintain and stay true to who we are? Not with hitbolulut, not with assimilation, but really setting ourselves aside by being the Am Levadad, the Am Boded, who sits alone. So that on one hand, in a sense, we're saying is that this people who dwells alone is the same people that is our resolution for how maybe we're going to be able to move forward. That this city that sits alone, that now we try to turn things around, it may become our salvation, so to speak, in quotes, is that we will wake up and smell the coffee when things become better and not become assimilated, not be kechol hagoyim. Maybe. But what about the personification of a widow? It says that is Haita ke almana. She has become like a widow. I'm not sure exactly why. I am sure why, but I'm going to get into it now. But in most language, I believe, the few languages I'm aware of, that a city, a world, the earth is known as she. So in Hebrew for sure. So she, the city of Yerushalayim, has become like a widow. Now, and by the way, the word the persona, the female persona, is going to come throughout much of the text and throughout Megillat Eicha. both in terms of a mother and a wife. We're going to see about a mother in a little while, but not yet. But we're going to talk about tonight about her perspective of being a wife. In a sense, it's painting the picture that Yerushalayim is like a bereaved both mother, which again that comes up later in the parak, but also, well, let me just talk about that for a second. When it paints the picture of Yerushalayim being an aggrieved mother, the grief is incalculable. Chas v'chalila, a person loses their child, not the normal course of life. That's part one. That's one perspective. The other perspective, and maybe a little bit more problematic, which we'll see in a second, is the idea that Yerushalayim is looked at as being a widow. Now, what is a widow? What does that evoke? It's supposed to evoke empathy, obviously, but also economic helplessness. Why do I say economic helplessness? It's not, forget the Jewish world, the world in general. If you go back just about 150 years and before that, women didn't have rights for the most part in many areas. They couldn't own property. They couldn't run a business. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. And therefore, that's part of the history behind the ketubah, by the way, also, is to provide, to make sure the woman is always protected, because historically she didn't have property. For the most part, she didn't. Okay, again, I'm not going to sidetrack. So that it's looking for it to evoke this economic helplessness, but more than that, it's her widowed state that her husband is, the loss of her husband is also in some cases, historically for some women, would have been the loss of her identity. We're not talking about modern times. We're talking about in ancient times. But who's the widow? I mean, from whom is she widowed? Think about that. She's like a widow. If Yerushalayim is the widow, who's the husband that died? Now, from a theological perspective, you would assume, first of all, you assume it's Hashem is the husband, right? We talked about many times the relationship between Hashem and Am Yisrael is a marriage. We just said it last week in V'zot HaBracha. Adonai misinai ba v'zarach misei lama ofiel mi'ar paran atamirav kodesh, etc., etc., etc. That's the marriage, Hashem coming out to greet the bride, and a marriage between Am Yisrael and Hashem, and then Esrat Hashem and Tanya. We're going to see this a lot late in the book. But that's a kind of a strange metaphor, because why not refer to this more of a divorce? Because theologically, how do we refer to Hashem, Chas v'Chalila, to say this, is that the city that's left behind is bereaved of her husband, i.e. Hashem. Maybe it should be a divorce as opposed to a widow. That should have been the personification in this particular case, or sorry, the metaphor. So I'm going to show you a slide. It's going to be a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, the Radak's explanation, and also the Rashi on the very first pasuk. We'll go to that, screen share. And we'll see what we're talking about here. Okay, first we're going to take a look at a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. It says as follows in Yirmiyahu. Now remember, Yirmiyahu wrote Sefer Yirmiyahu, and he also wrote Megillat Eicha. Yirmiyahu says in the end of the book of Yirmiyahu, Hilo alman Yisrael biyuda me Elohav, me Adonai Tzevaot, ki aratzam mala'a asham mikadosh Yisrael. In English, it means for Israel is not a widow, nor is Yehuda widowed from his God. Nor Yehuda from his God, from Hashem Tzvakot. Okay, that's the main part of the pasuk I wanted to say. So the first statement is that Yirmiyahu says is that Israel is not a widow. What does that mean? Take a look now at the second line. This is the Radak. What does it mean? Kilo alman. Eino kemo almana shemet be'ala. Yerushalayim is not like a widow whose husband has died. Shehi azuva mimenu leolam, that she is completely left without him forever, bereft of him forever. Lo ken Yisrael, not so Israel. Ki ba'ala chai v'kayam. Her husband is alive and existing. V'im azva begalut. If he has left her in the galut, od yifkedena. He will, I'm just going to use the word remember her. That's not what it means. V'yashove leha will return to her. V'yifkod al oivehem, and will take revenge against her enemies. You'll notice something, and I'm not going to digress into this now. I talked about it a few times over the years. Pei kuf dalet here and pei kuf dalet over here. Totally different meaning. Sefer Bamidbar is Chumash HaPikudim. I've talked about this before. It's not my chidush. This is Rav Menachem Liebtag Shlita. There's a tremendous shiur and an introduction to Sefer Bamidbar on the pei kuf dalet aspect. It has about 6 meanings throughout the Sefer Bamidbar. Anyways, so Radak says very clearly that the meaning of the pasuk in Yirmiyahu is that no, do not say that Yerushalayim is like an almanah. Rashi on the very first pasuk that we just read in Eicha says as follows: Hayta ke almanah velo almanah mamash. What does it mean? What does Rashi mean? Look at this first word: Hayta ke almanah. Remember the kaf in Hebrew has a few meanings. In this case, it means like. She, Yerushalayim, is like a widow. Velo almanah mamash, but not an actual widow. But rather like a woman whose husband has gone overseas, and his intention is to return to her. So already the very, very first Rashi in Megillat Eicha is giving already a little bit of nechama to us, the readers, that we know that there'll be an eventual return of the husband. And they say it's Hayta ki almanah. It doesn't say Hayta almanah. Okay, that's a very important distinction. Okay, let's continue back in talking about this parak, and then we're going to go to the second pasuk. It's also important to realize that not only does Eicha start with the sadness and the devastation, but the first thing it does is looks back. Where were we? Where are we now? We can't take it out of context. Imagine a person landing from Mars on the day after the destruction of Yerushalayim, and you have to decide what's going on here. They wouldn't know what happened before. They wouldn't know the glory and the grandeur of the city of Yerushalayim that was before that. And therefore, part of what Yirmiyahu has to do is to tell us that we have to recollect our past. Zechor yemot olam binu shnot dor vador. That's a pasuk in the Torah, that we have to remember our past. This is way before, I forgot his name. I'm sure some of you remember his name. Those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. Way before, we're talking Tanakh time, that we don't exclusively focus on the present. For sure, we look to the future, but we also have to look at the past. My father, Shalom, used to tell me when I was younger, when he was teaching me how to drive, actually, but I think even before that, that if a car you drive, is a tremendous lesson in life. You have to look ahead where you're going. If you're going to change what you're doing, you have to let people know. There's your signals. But you also have to look behind you. You have to see what's going on the side, what's going on around you. But if you're going to come to a stop, or you're going to do something that's going to veer from what you're doing, you have to look in your rearview mirror. In a sense, that's what Yirmiyahu is doing here at the beginning of Megillat Eicha. He's telling us what happened in the past, where we come from, and now by comparison, or what we would call in literature compare and contrast, he's telling us where we are right now. Let's take a look at the second pasuk, please. Pasuk bet. Bachot tivke balayla. She surely cries at night. By the way, in Hebrew, when you double a word, you're trying to emphasize. And when you double the end of a word, you're making it sound like ish. For example, when you talk about the various colors that were tameh and tahor by a leper, by a person who had sarat, it says yirak adam dam. When you repeat the last sound of the word, it's like ish, red ish or green ish. But when you say the word twice, it's emphasis. In Hebrew, if you want to say, that is the guy, he is the guy, there's no present tense for to be in Hebrew. So when you say, who, Amazi, he is, you repeat the word, that's the emphasis. So here you have Bachot throughout Tanakh, you see this. This is nothing new. Bachot tivke balayla, she surely cries at night. B'dimatah alechayah, and her tears are on her cheeks. Ela menachem mikol ohaveha. She has no comforter or comfort from her lovers. Kol re'eha bagduba, all of her friends betrayed her. And they have become her enemies. Now, there's multiple ambiguities here. There's things that are not clear. First of all, what is the difference between Ohavim and Re'im? The beloved or the lovers and the friends. That's first of all. What does it mean? Hayula la'oivim, they have become enemies. Who has become the enemies? Is it both those groups? Is it just the Re'im, the friends? So first of all, before we look at those details, we also want to see that, again, that the crying aspect, the loneliness, those people that gave the city Yerushalayim support and comfort, it's gone. They're gone. And now they're gone. They've turned their back on her and it caused her more problem. And this weeping and this crying, when does it happen? It says, Bachol tivke balayla. Why is it important for Yirmiyahu to say that word balayla? He could very simply have said, Bachol tivke v'dimata alecheya. Now, yes, we know we want to have certain rhyming and a certain meter to the way it's written. And that that's one thing I'm not going to get into for the most part in our books that discuss that, the rhyme aspect and the meter, but I'm not going to. So it could have a different word. Why Bachol tivke balayla? Because I'm going to tell you 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 different usages of night throughout Tanakh. The night gives us feelings. Now, again, what I'm referring to, I'm not going to quote Psukim right now, but it's used throughout Tanakh for different purposes. A feeling of doom, a feeling of danger, a lack of clarity, confusion, turmoil. All these metaphors of night are here in that one word at the beginning of Megillat Eicha. It's also a metaphor for God's elusiveness. It was a dark night. What does it mean? Physically, it was dark. Okay, great. But also, a person can have what we know that when we talk about Hashem, we talk about the Or Eloki, the divine light. The first thing God creates after the universe is light, the Or, right? So this is the beginning of this pasuk is giving this uncertainty, this lack of clarity, the confusion. I mentioned to you last time, and some of you may not have been here, but I shall repeat it very briefly, that in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, when the first time I went through it, and I was going through it, and you come to the end of a hallway, and wait, where do you go to the right, you go to the left, it's very unclear, there are no signs, you have to figure it out, was done on purpose to make you feel just like they did, lahavdil, for a brief moment, this lack of what's happening next. Where am I supposed to go? And that's the implication here of this word as well. So let's talk about for a moment Ohaveha and Re'eha, Jerusalem's lovers and the friends. So who are the loved ones who deny Yerushalayim, the comfort? You know, the first people, if God forbid there's a tragedy, or not a tragedy, something sad. There's a difference between things that are sad. A person who dies at 98 years old is not a tragedy, unless God forbid it happened in a tragic way. It's part of life. That's what happens. It's sad. But a person who dies at 18 years old, God forbid, that's a tragedy. We saw this week, last week, the bus accident. It was an absolute tragedy. So, but when there's a tragedy, when there's a sad thing that happens, the first people that help you are those that are close to you, the ones that you love, the ones that are your family, the ones that are your close neighbors. And here, who are they that betrayed her? Secondly, well, first of all, probably the most obvious would be the citizens of Yerushalayim herself. Why are they not able to comfort her? They've been tossed and sent into Galut. It's not saying that, oh, they were there and didn't comfort her. The people of Yerushalayim are being taken out, they've been massacred, or being thrown out of the city, being exiled. So therefore, they're not there to help. They're not there to wipe the tears away. But it's also possible that the word ohaveh was specifically chosen because it could also evoke the concept. When I say the word in English, if I say he had a lover, the connotation is also something illicit, something that wasn't allowed to have happen. So we know, having learned Sefer Melachim over the last few years, that one of the biggest problems in Sefer Melachim was idolatry, which we talked about. The idea is the equivalent of adultery between man and woman, which is when a Jew worships avodah zarah. That's adultery, so to speak, quote unquote, against Hashem. So it's also there to evoke this image of this slap in the face to the people of the city of their unfaithfulness to Hashem. I want to read to you a pasuk. Let me put on the screen from Hosea. There's a pasuk in Hosea. Hosea gave a prophecy. This is he gave prophecy before the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, and said as follows: "V'ridfa et me'ahaveha v'lo tasigotam." She will pursue her lovers, but she will not catch up with them. Uvikashtam. Well, I knew it didn't sound right. V'lo timsa. She will search for them, and she will not find them. That's pasuk Yutet. Continue. V'amran, she will say, El chavashuvel ishi harishon. I will go back to my first husband. Ki tov li az me'ata. It's better than what I have now. In other words, I couldn't find my lover. I'm going to go back to my first husband. Plus the ... the ellipse, it's actually an extra dot, is the next, is pasuk yud bet. V'ata, now, agale et navluta le'enei me'ahaveha. V'ish lo yatzilena miadi. Now I will expose her disgrace in front of her lovers, and no person will save her from my hand. This is a prophecy from Hosea that this is a punishment, that because Am Yisrael was not faithful to Hashem, then there are repercussions from that. And in a sense, her disgrace is laid open for everyone to see. There's another midrash. It's called Midrash Eicha Zuta. I'm not going to put on the screen, that suggests, and I'm not sure I exactly understand it, that the lovers are nevi'ei sheker, false prophets. Maybe because they were attracted to the false prophets and believe what they were saying. I'm not exactly sure, but that's the little bit of the ohaveha. What about the re'eha? What about the re'im? The friends. Who are the friends? So let me take it off here first for a moment. Who are the friends? It's possible. Now, again, I say every time I'm saying possible, it means there isn't necessarily clarity 100%. We know what exactly the Navi is referring to. There could be, we've seen this throughout for the last 10 years, that literally 11 years that we've been learning in Navi. There could be multiple ways to look at something. A possible meaning of the Re'im, our friends, are her political allies. In other words, now, not only within Israel, the Jews themselves were unable to comfort Yerushalayim, but even those who were her adversaries, who were her political allies, such as Egypt at that point, were leaving her in the dust. That their relationship with Israel was pragmatic. It was for the economic reasons, or whatever it would be. But when push came to shove and Israel was on the bottom, they left her. I'm just going to mention one more idea, and then we're going to stop. And when we get into a little bit further into this parak, we're going to see a couple of situations where history almost literally has repeated itself in modern times, especially during the time of the Holocaust. I want you to take a look, and this is kind of like your homework, so to speak. I'm not going to go through this now. I want you to look through the chapter, through the parak, and I want you to read, you can look at Hebrew and English, and count every time you see the word kol, or all, and see if there's any difference between those, every time it says it, and in the very last pasuk, okay? Well, this is where I'm going to pick up Bezrat Hashem next Sunday night, that the word kol, which is a milah mancha, again, I told you, and I looked it up. There's an English equivalent. I just don't remember what it is. You can't just keep saying a word that repeats itself, but there's a word for it. But this milah mancha, the word kol, meaning all, repeats over and over. Say it again.
Leitmotif.
Leitmotif, yes. Leitmotif is actually a German, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, it's German.
Right, it's German. There is a word. That is the word that's used, by the way, for milah mancha. There's another word that sticks in the back of my head. I can't remember what it is. But you're going to go through and see how many times the word kol appears, and also look at the last pasuk and see if it's the same as the others when it says kol. That's your your homework, Bezrat Hashem. We'll pick it up
Yay,
again
we get
next week.
homework.
Yes,
Yay, we get homework.
it's awesome. I know.
Yay, we
Yeah.
get homework.
You don't have to turn a report in, at least to me.
Oh,
So
shucks, I was gonna write a 450-page report.
I was supposed to only be 430. I guess you're very religious. You're machmir to go to 450. It's excellent.
I'm machmir as anything. Anybody knows
Very
me? I
good.
think I read my phone.
Very good. By the way, Bezrat Hashem, all goes well. We will have class every Sunday night for the next 4 weeks, Bezrat Hashem, maybe 5. And then the 6th one, Bezrat Hashem, we will not be having class. It'll be the night of the wedding. I'm assuming I'll probably be going to the wedding and not having class. We'll see.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. Sorry. But in the meantime, I wish you all a Shavua
Mazel
Tov.
tov to the couple.
What's that?
Mazel tov to the couple.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. Mazel and bracha.
thank you very much.
Okay, and have a wonderful evening and Shavua Tov, everybody.
שבוע טוב, תודה רבה, יישר כוח.
Vakasha.